you, Chairman, and thank you both, gentlemen. In relation to the board meetings at the CBFSAI, there'd be discussions before you would take a position, say, agree a financial stability report or a pre-budget letter. Can you tell me were contrarian views ever expressed? And also then, how was consensus reached in terms of agreeing a report?
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, there were contrarian views expressed, certainly, in relation to it. There were a number of board members who had different views, and I had different views at times myself, which I sort of said earlier on. But the nature of this was that the financial stability reports were initially prepared by the central bank economist, agreed with the executive people at the level of the regulator, at a sort of an interaction, a board established for that purpose, and after a process of iteration came to the main board for discussion. The way the main board worked, the discussions were held. They were robust discussions by and large, and then those views were taken on board and fed back into the process again. And finally, the report came out. But it didn't, you know what I mean? It didn't go back and forwards to the board, if you know what I mean. It was left with the governor and the governor principally to bring forward the final report.
Would either of you have been aware of contrarian views at senior management in the central bank not making it their way into the boardroom?
No, okay. Definitely not.
Would either of you have been aware of research being conducted and then not being included in the first draft, say, of a financial stability report?
No. And I'd have to say that I was surprised at the evidence of an earlier contributor who indicated certain of those issues as taking place. Surprised only because the opportunity was available at the board when he was presenting at the board to indicate reservations which he personally might have had, and they didn't surface at the board.
Okay.
I think the board would have welcomed that kind of input, because you're actually, with subjects as complex as these, hugely dependent on the professional staff that you have to identify all sides of a problem. It strikes me that it must be a little bit like being in government, that a minister would presumably want to hear all sides of an argument from his officials. So my view is it would have been welcomed by the board, and there would have been no downside, as far as the board was concerned, to anybody coming forward with a contrary view.
And sorry to go over this again. In the 2007 Financial Stability Report, the view was taken that there would be a soft landing in the economy, and Professor Hoden in his report wrote that there was no analytical evidence for this conclusion in the report. So can you remember that discussion and how you decided to favour the soft landing?
Well, I can't personally remember the discussion at this remove, but I agree fully with David about the robustness of the discussions at the board. There's no question about it. And there were contrarian views amongst the board members. But like as in any organisation which I've ever been part, there are different views. And the job of the chairman or whoever's the chief person at that meeting is to get a consensus at the end of the day that the organisation can stand over. And that's what happened.
Mr. Begg, did anyone say where's the evidence for this? Where's the evidence in this report for the soft landing?
Well, I can think of one board member who did at least actually query, the robustness of the financial position of the banks. What I think happened actually was this: if you reflect back on that period of time, around 2006, there was a sort of a tapering off, which appeared to suggest, that the cooling off was actually happening in the economy. There was a lot of concern publicly about this in political circles and so on, a lot of commentary on it, and then suddenly the whole thing started to rev up again, right? But then in 2007 it began to taper off again. So the initial sort of shock, I suppose, that the construction sector wasn't cooling was kind of assuaged a little bit by the trend, the second part of that trend. And I think that's what probably gave rise to the assurances about the soft landing, or the conviction that the soft landing would actually happen. But I want to be pains to say that my personal thinking is that this all has to be located in the context of what was the international orthodoxy at the time. And my feeling is that, just to finish on this point very quickly, I mean, the epitome of that was Greenspan going before the US Congressional Committee and saying, there's a flaw. I didn't think there was a flaw, but there is a flaw. But everybody else was working under the flawed conditions, if you like, and people believed it.
Leave the orthodoxy aside for a moment. In 2006, the Financial Stability Report had a report on overvaluation of house prices. It didn't feature in the 2007 report. Subsequently, looking back from 2008, they saw that had it featured, it would have showed an overvaluation of more than 30%. So, being involved with financial stability reports each year, did you not notice in 2007, where's this piece of research we normally have, and why isn't it in this year, given the kinds of discussions that you were having?
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough point, all right. But you could have inferred, if you like, that the same fundamental conditions existed in 2007 as in 2000 concerning the overvaluation.
Concerning the lack of the research in that particular financial stability.
Yeah, but maybe it wouldn't have revealed very much more, if you know what I mean, about what the conditions were in the market in 2007. The only changed indicator in 2007 was this apparent moderation in the rate of rise of house prices.
I think it was subsequently found that had that research been in the Financial Stability Report, you couldn't have reached the conclusion of a soft landing. So I don't think it's correct to say.
Maybe that's true. I honestly don't know.
Okay. Just moving on to Mr. Begg, if I may. You were chairman of the Audit Committee. How long were you chairperson of that committee?
Off the top of my head, about 10 years, I'd say.
About 10 years, okay. And what exactly did that involve then?
Essentially, it involved auditing the internal bank systems. A big part of it, for example, would have been the currency centre. And, you know, it's a very sensitive area where we were printing money and printing notes and coins and so on. That would have been one part. The other part would have been managing the systems for the ECB, like the target system and the settlement systems that operate. It would have ranged across the range of systems that the bank operated, and even down to things like the social clubs and social activities. All of that was obvious. There was
of the central bank, but not the individual banks.
Pardon?
Of the central bank, but not the individual banks.
Not the individual banks at all. No. Actually, there was the audit process was quite rigorous because we had an internal audit division. And we had two auditors, the Controller and Auditor General, and then the auditor appointed at the request of the ECB.
And did that work change at all after the Act of 2003?
No, except that there was a representative of the regulator on the audit committee, and the regulator had its own, as well as the bank's overall audit committee. There was an audit committee for the regulator as well.
There's two separate audit committees, one for it.
Yes, but the bank one was the overall.
So as chairperson, you had sight then as well, operationally, of the audit of the financial regulator.
Yes.
Okay. And do you think there were sufficient technical skills in the audit committee to properly do its work?
There were about 10 people in the internal audit division. Sorry, I think you're asking me slightly. You're asking me about the committee. I beg your pardon. Yeah. Well, I'll answer both anyway. Well, as far as I know, but I mean, to be fair, I wasn't an auditor myself, and the other people. I don't think we'd actually had any accountant on us as such. But we had a strong internal audit division, which had about 10 people as well as the head of audit. The biggest problem we tended to find there, and it links into earlier questions relating to the regulator that John mentioned, was that systems are extremely important in the central bank structure. And the IT dimension of that was very, very critical. It was extremely hard in a tight labour market situation to recruit people of a high calibre, sufficiently high to work in that particular area, and there was always this concern, even from internal audit, of a slight deficit. That you're never quite caught up with the ideal situation, but at the same time, it was a strong function. I'd say stronger than in most enterprises.
This is my final question, if I may. Mr. Begg, is in relation to your oral remarks today. You mentioned social partnership quite a bit.
Yeah, but I was only responding to you see. I mean, not to you personally, but
in your opening statement.
when my original statement to the committee, there was no mention of social partnership because you didn't raise it with me. In fact, I was wondering why did these good people want to see me at all? But then when you produced your document, there's about 20 pages of an IMF report on social partnership. So I felt this is of interest to you. So in that sense,
when you were coming in and writing a written statement to appear and addressing your role as General Secretary, it didn't occur to you to address social partnership?
Not at all, because you didn't raise it,
But when you have a specific section in your written statement talking about your role as General Secretary and looking back on the crisis period.
Yeah.
And even though we've had findings in, for example, the Wright report saying that social partnership overwhelmed the budgetary process, you didn't think to address that issue in your written statement or to comment on that?
No, if you had raised it with me, I most certainly would have done. But it didn't seem to me to be germane because, quite frankly, I have a difficulty trying to identify a causal relationship between social partnership and the banking crisis. Because, as I said, I mean, Ireland, if social partnership had an adverse effect, the only area you could see it having an adverse effect in was in relation to fiscal policy. But Ireland didn't have a fiscal crisis. It had a banking crisis.
You don't think Ireland had a fiscal crisis?
No, not until after the banking crisis.
After the banking crisis.
No.
So you don't accept the findings of the Wright report that social partnership overwhelmed the budgetary process?
No, I don't at all, because, quite frankly, what I would have seen was that over the period of 5 or 6 years leading up to the financial crisis, Ireland was running a budget surplus every year, and it was quite substantial. I think up to 2.9% at the end, and there was no adverse effect on that from social partnership that I could see. And I did cite it in my supplementary statement, the evidence from Fritz Garp from the Cologne Institute, in which he said that in the case of Ireland and Spain, social partnership was a counter, if you like, to the trends that were happening in the economy. It's just that it wasn't a strong enough counterpart. And I did also indicate that the SRI had found in relation to competitiveness that it had been extremely helpful to the foreign direct investment sector here.
We've had admissions from four members of government in the committee that fiscal policies were unsustainable. Do you accept that social partnership played any role in those unsustainable fiscal policies? And also, the second question, if you felt that economic growth was an unsustainable house of cards, as you put it, why did you seek and agree wage increases off the back of that unsustainable growth?
Yeah, well, in the first case, fiscal policy being unsustainable was not related to social partnership. The unsustainable element of fiscal policy was the extent to which it depended on property transaction taxes, which amounted to, I think, about 13 or 14% of total revenue. In the case of the overheating in the economy, the problem that didn't relate back to the wage increases per se, because, as I say, Ireland was an extremely highly productive economy at that time. There were huge gains in productivity over the period from, I think, around 1980 to 2011, something like a 280% increase in productivity. There's no difficulty there. And in the level of pay increase that we saw was simply keeping abreast of inflation, no more and no less.